I don't know about you, but I've been thinking about the Blast airdrop ever since it was first announced in November 2023. I actually found this screenshot of my bridged balance to what was known at the time as the Blast multisig before the L2 even existed. And, the baby bags of zero point 0.5 ETH and 500 USDC were putting in the work. While it feels like it's been a lifetime since Blast was simply a multisig that many of us degens sent ETH and stablecoins to, the reality is that Blast has been live on mainnet for just a little over 2 months now. Now, the real question is it still early or is it too late to get exposure? Last year, Blast announced that the points redemption, i.e. the token generation event, or TGE, would be live on May 24th. However, I am operating under the assumption that this would be the best case scenario. And the reality is that the points redemption and token generation event will likely be at the end of the month, at least in my brain. At the time of filming this video, there are still 6 point multipliers to be released, and we have to remember, 15 million Blast Gold was just distributed to 72 different projects on Blast mainnet. And the reality is, these projects need to distribute probably all of the gold before TGE. Now, the question on everyone's mind: how much is Blast Gold worth, and is it worth my time right now? Well, before we dig into that, I think it's important to zoom out and take a look at where we are. Blast has only been live on mainnet for just a little over 2 months now, and I know sometimes when we're in the trenches, it's actually kind of easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. While the noise on the timeline is growing with things like Fantasy and PacMoon dominating CT mindshare, the on-chain metrics actually paint a bit of a different picture. So if we look at on-chain data, we can see that Blast has facilitated nearly 6 million ETH in volume, which is the US equivalent of about $17 billion over the last 2 months. Now, that number may sound like a lot, but actually, if we look at the daily ETH volume, you'll see that it's been fairly stable. There's been no massive upticks in capital deployment. This little tick here is pretty much because Blast had just first launched and everyone was like bridging over and all of that stuff. And the same can actually be said for new wallets. And you have to keep in mind that folks have multiple wallets. Like this uptick right here, this is Fantasy, right? Because everyone had to create a Privy wallet. But if we zoom out and actually look on DeFi Llama and compare the TVLs of Optimism, Arbitrum, Base, and Blast, you can actually see that while Blast is a significantly newer chain compared to these other ecosystems, it's grown at a remarkable rate. You can see here Blast is this nice little yellow section. And if we zoom in, you can even see it better. Like, clearly the incentives are working. I guess what I'm trying to say here is based on the data that we're seeing, it still feels like we're early. There still hasn't been any massive influx of new capital. However, I expect that as we get closer to the TGE or even after the TGE, that's going to completely shift. My guess is that attention on Blast is going to be very similar to how attention came to Blur after Blur farming season 1. So the other thing to keep in mind too is that when it comes to incentives and hooking people in, no one does it better than Pac-Man and the core contributors of Blur, many of whom are also core contributors of Blast. As of right now, the only real thing with regards to the Blast tokenomics that we are aware of is that the airdrop is going to be split 50-50 between points and gold. And for those of you guys who don't know, points are earned based off of your TVL on Blast, so just depositing USDB or ETH on Blast will earn you points, and gold is awarded through your on-chain activity interacting with various projects, platforms, and protocols. So what should we be referencing when we start thinking about the value of gold? NFT Stats estimate is probably going to be the one that most will refer to. He is estimating that each bar of gold is worth $10.68. His latest estimate was actually contingent on how much gold was left to be distributed, and as long as no more gold goes out, he actually nailed it on the head. Now, it should be said that none of us are financial advisors, and none of us actually know what gold is worth, but we can certainly try to speculate wildly. Within his estimates, here are a few things that NFT Stats calls out that I think are worth noting. Number one, the Blast jackpot feature is much more dilutive than most initially anticipated. And we actually saw this play out when Pac-Moon basically hit 2 jackpots almost back to back. Number two, there are 3 unknown variables within his calculation. The first being the FDV, which is fully diluted value of Blast at the time of launch. What percentage of supply is actually going to go to Blast farmers, i.e. is going to get distributed to the community, and how much of the gold has yet to be distributed. Stats estimates puts Blast at a $12 billion FDV, which is actually the same as Optimism and higher than Arbitrum and Matic. Again, I have a feeling that Pac-Man hasn't shown all his cards quite yet, and I am 99% sure we can expect a second season of Blast farming after the TGE. Now, if you're looking for places to get Blast gold, I got some alpha for you. But first, I have a homework assignment. I've gone ahead and set aside 0.5 ETH to give away to a few folks who are studying. And to enter, all you have to do is tell me what about Blast excites you the most and why. This will run until the Fantasy Second Main Tournament is over. Okay, now farmer hats on. Look, definitely research the projects that have received gold from the latest distribution if you're interested in deploying capital before TGE. And if you're curious about what I'm farming and what I'm paying attention to, you can check my pinned post on X. That's it for this one. As we approach the end of May and this highly anticipated token generation event, let's all just lock the fuck in. As always, bearish or bullish, keep farming, keep building, keep learning. Let's fucking go.